Hello. Um, this is Grange Co-op and Purina Animal Nutrition Horse Nutrition Live session. We're just now opening up. I see Greg Roush has joined us. Hopefully we'll have a few more join us here before we get too far into this. So we'll take a few minutes and wait and see if we get some additional people joining us. Well, I see that there's looks like there's a few people watching. I'd love it if you would add your name and where you're from in the chat. Maybe add how many horses you own or feed, and I certainly hope you'll include some questions, because this won't be nearly as much fun if it's just me talking to you all for several minutes as opposed to let's having a conversation and be able to answer questions. So I'll start out, and again, this is a Grange Co-op and Purina Animal Nutrition Facebook Live session. This session is supposed to be everything you wanted to know about feeding horses but were afraid to ask. And so again, I hope you'll ask some questions. My name is Karen Davison. I do work for Purina Animal Nutrition. I am a nutritionist with Purina. I've been there for 26 years now. And I am a horse person. I've grown up around horses and shown and competed with horses all my life. And my husband trains horses for a living. My kids both compete, but they're both grown. But the Davison family is into rodeo performance events and cutting horses. Would love to hear if any of you all have what kind of horses you have and what kind of things you do with your horses. And let's get into the presentation a little bit. So just to give you a little bit of background, I am a horse person who's a bit of a nutrition nerd, and I long time ago had developed a interest in biology and physiology and all the things that go on with that, and developed a specific fascination with how nutrition affected all that. And so when I went to Texas A&M University, animal science degree, and then I saw that you could go to graduate school and just study horses. So that's what I did. And so my whole career has been pretty much studying horse nutrition. And that's just my passion in life, in addition to getting to ride and compete and then be a grandmother. So I definitely hope, again, that we get some interaction and some questions, but I'll start out maybe asking a few questions and see if we can get some interaction. Who fed a horse today? If you're on here, I hope maybe you were responsible for feeding a horse. I'm curious how you decided what to feed and how much to feed. I work for Purina, so obviously I hope that you chose a Purina product, and I have all the confidence in the world in all of our Purina products. But one of the things that's important, regardless of the brand that you feed, it's important that you choose a feed that's designed for the horse that you're feeding it to. At least start there. And the way you know is you look at the age of the horse, the activity level of the horse, And then you can get into some things like preferences that you may have on feed forms. Do you prefer a pelleted feed? Do you prefer a textured feed? Those kind of things. Maybe you have some specific ingredients or attributes that are important to you. But definitely start out at first with feeding a feed in the way it's designed to be fed. So feeding a growing horse feed or a mare and foal feed to growing horses, performance horse feeds to performance horses, and the like. Then I would encourage you to make sure that you're feeding that feed the way it was intended to be fed. And that's important because many feed products are designed to be fed in a certain way, and they work really well if you feed them in the way they were designed, but they can't do nearly as well if you feed them in a different manner. So, for example, Purina Equine Senior, it was the first nationally available senior feed for horses. Before we came out with Equine Senior, people just didn't really even know that senior horses had a special way to be fed. We just thought they were getting old, and that was just part of it. And we learned through research, Purina did research on aging horses, and we learned that we could change the nutrition, the way we delivered nutrition, and make a big difference for those senior horses. But Equine Senior is designed to replace part of the hay or all of the hay if needed, because that's one of the issues with senior horses, is that they begin to decline in their ability to chew and properly digest hay or pasture. So we needed to be able to include that in the diet. And with that inclusion of hay or pasture equivalents in that feed, it takes more of the feed than you expect out of a normal formulated feed. So you have to keep in mind when you feed a product like Equine Senior that it's replacing hay and feed, and so you have to feed a big volume of it. So it's typically a minimum of about 6 hay for Equine Senior to deliver the nutrition that a horse needs. And some older horses who eat nothing but Equine Senior and can't chew hay anymore, they're eating 13 to 18 pounds a day of Equine Senior. And some people kind of get panicky about that because you think, oh my gosh, that's a lot of feed. But again, it's feed and hay. And when you think that most horses eat, 20, 25 pounds of hay a day, then you've got to replace what comes in that hay with what's in the Equine Senior. But I do talk to people from time to time who feed Equine Senior in a cup or two, and they wonder why it's not doing a good job to their horse. And so it's about making sure that not only do you have the feed designed for the horse that you're feeding it to, but that you feed it according to recommendations. So if feeds are designed to be fed by the pound, and 3, 4, 5 pounds, or by the 3-quart scoop or so, and you're only feeding a small amount of that, then you're not meeting all the nutritional needs of the horse. The other thing is we like to encourage people to feed by weight, not by volume. Where I'm from, here in Texas, we used to have a saying that if people quit drinking coffee, horses might starve to death. And that was because so many people used a coffee can as a feed scoop. And we don't see that quite as much anymore, but I think those old 3-pound coffee cans may be in the Smithsonian or something. But a 3-pound coffee can from years ago, it held 3 pounds of coffee. It didn't hold 3 pounds of most feeds. It actually holds, if you filled a 3-pound coffee can full, it holds 4 pounds of a pelleted feed like Strategy, Purina Strategy. It only holds about 2.5 pounds of crimped oats. So there's quite a range in volume. And in fact, if you look, I'll show you here, we have a Purina supplement cup, and it has recommendations for how much to feed of Purina Enrich, Super Sport, Outlast, and Amplify. But you can see where like 1 pound of Amplify, the line's up here close to the top, and 1 pound of Super Sport is further down on the cup, because those products weigh different amount per given volume. So it's important that you weigh your feed and you know how much you're actually feeding the horse, and then be sure again that you're feeding in the feeding rates that that feed is designed to be fed for. The other thing would be to make sure that you're feeding to body condition. And you know, when we look at feeding directions for feed, they're usually based on body weight. So feed so many pounds per 100 pounds of body weight. And that's important, and that's a good place to start. But it's important to know that every horse is an individual, and we all know that. None of us have the average horse. So for instance, if your feed says feed 1/2 pound per 100 pounds of body weight, if you have a 1,000-pound horse, that's 5 pounds of feed that you should be feeding. So make sure you weigh that up. But if your horse is a hard keeper, 5 pounds may not be enough for your horse. So you may need to feed 6 or 7 or even 8 pounds or so. If your horse is a real easy keeper, one of those air ferns that gets fat just looking at a bag of feed, you may not be able to feed that feed at all. You may not be able to feed a low enough amount to meet their nutrient requirements. And so, again, that's where looking at their body condition, and I put purinamills.com up on the screen because I'd encourage you to go to the website there. We have a lot of educational material on the website under the horse, under all species, if you have other animals as well. But especially under horse, I'd like you to look for the body condition score chart and learn how to body condition your horse so you can see how fat or thin the horse is. And then you make feeding adjustments based on body condition. If they're a little thin, you feed more. If they're a little fat, you feed less. So I'd encourage you to go there. And then I would also mention that, again, along with along with body condition, if your horse is one of those easy keepers and you have really good quality hay or pasture and they really can't eat the recommended amount of a formulated feed without getting too fat, then you want to look into products such as Purina Enrich Plus, which is a ration balancer. And ration balancers are highly fortified, concentrated products that are intended to meet nutritional requirements that are not completely met by the hay or pasture, but to meet them in a very low feeding rate so that you don't provide a lot of additional calories that the horse may not need. So the Purina Enrich Plus, I like to call it nutrition for horses who don't need feed. So a 1 pound feeding rate, and if you look on our supplement cup, that is right there. It's 3 kitchen measuring cups a day. So just that much once a day will meet all the protein, vitamin, and mineral requirements when fed with good quality hay or pasture in a horse, 1,000-pound horse at maintenance. So again, just a quick review of feeding the feeds according to age, according to activity level and preference of feed form, and things like that. So we'll get into, I see Greg put in a question. Can you explain different energy sources and how they're different? Yeah. Horses have what I call basically 3 fuel tanks. There's the carbohydrate fuel tank, there's the fat fuel tank, then there is the protein fuel tank. So it's like if you pull up to the gas station and you're driving a diesel truck, you want to make sure you put diesel in that truck. You don't want to put gasoline in your diesel truck. If you've ever done that, that's a problem. So what is going on there? So that's where they get their calories to do the work or to fuel the physiological functions that are going on in the body all the time. And so carbohydrates are split into 2 different types. There's structural carbohydrates, which is primarily fibers, and then there's non-structural carbs or non-soluble carbohydrates, which are starches and sugars. No, soluble carbohydrates. I'm getting myself confused. So when you see the term NSC, those are non-structural carbohydrates. And those are the starches and sugars. And so interesting thing is back a few years ago, carbohydrates kind of got a little bit demonized. And I think it kind of seemed to coincide with the time when the Atkins diet got popular with people for themselves. And then it kind of translated into horses. And there are horses who are sensitive to starch and sugar levels in the diet, that if you overfeed starch and sugar, you can end up with horses that are what we call metabolic. They have symptoms very similar to type 2 diabetic people. They're very at high risk to founder. They develop a lot of fat deposits and really odd fat deposits, and they really are having trouble managing blood sugar and insulin levels. That's not all horses, and that also has a lot to do with body condition to begin with. So horses who are sedentary, are not very active, and who are overweight are way more prone to develop those symptoms and that syndrome, metabolic syndrome, than are horses, say, for instance, like thoroughbred race horses, who eat more starch and sugar than any other horse I can think of for the most part, but rarely are they metabolic because they are fit, they're athletes, they're burning off all those calories, and they really need those starch and sugar calories. Those are muscle fuel sources. So it's important that we have a variety of fuel sources. None are good or bad. There's just some that are specific for certain activities and certain types of activity. So interesting enough, is I get calls from people sometimes that are looking for a feed with low or no carbohydrates. And if you think about it, horses eat plants, right? And plants are where carbohydrates come from. If you were to try to feed a horse a carbohydrate-free diet, you would have to get them to eat ham and eggs or something like that, but they eat plants. And what always surprises horse owners is when you actually look at the analysis, a lot of pasture grass has higher sugar content than sweet feeds. And we say the word sweet feed or textured feed, and those are typically grain mixes, and they have some molasses on them. And so people think, oh, those have got to be really high in sugar. And they're not really as high in sugar as you might think, but they can be high in starch because the grain does bring some starch in with it. So it's just a matter of kind of understanding that there are different calorie sources. The fat fuel tank is one that's gotten popular over the last several years. I actually did my research at Texas A&M many years ago in fat added diets for horses. And those, it was not a common thing back then to have fat added diets for horses. The average fat level in a normal horse's diet was about somewhere between 2 and maybe 5% on the upper end. If you fed a lot of corn or oats, you got up maybe 5%, but most horse feeds had 2 to 3% of fat in them back then. And then we started adding fat to horses' diets, and we saw some benefits. And now people love fat and think higher and higher fat is always better. And I will tell you, it's not. There is a limit to what the horse can digest and absorb, and you'll eventually overwhelm that and end up having the oil come out in the stool. So if you start seeing greasy stools, you know you've overwhelmed the capacity of the small intestine to absorb that fat. But fat calories are efficient, and they're what we call cool calories, in that there's very little heat of digestion of fat, whereas fiber, for instance, produces a lot of heat of digestion. And fat's good for replacing body fat. It's not good for refueling muscles. So you can't refill muscle fuel with fat calories. You have to have some starch and sugar calories to do that. So if you have a horse that doesn't do a lot of hard work, that's explosive, more anaerobic type work, more of the endurance, long, slow distance type work, fat calories are beneficial. But if they're doing a lot of anaerobic work, if they're jumping, if they're cutting cattle, if they're polo horses, race horses, they need an amount of starch and sugar to refuel that muscle glycogen, especially if they do the work a couple of days in a row. You've got to have some starch and sugar in the diet to refill that muscle glycogen stores. And then fat calories, if you train the muscles to utilize some fat, you can begin to maybe spare a little of that muscle glycogen and have horses burn the fat before they burn the muscle glycogen, which can be helpful for situations like where you do a lot of warm up before you compete. that kind of thing. So we have carbohydrate calories, and we have two types of carbohydrates. We have structural carbs and non-structural carbs. And then we have fat calories. And then I had mentioned the protein fuel tank. And we would rather not fill up from the protein fuel tank because dietary protein is expensive, both financially and metabolically. It costs a lot of energy really to burn protein for energy, and it produces a lot of heat. So we would rather they use the protein to build muscle mass and hoof quality and hair coat and the things that we want to use use protein for, not so much for calories. So let's see what else is in there. Oh, I want to say this. We talked about body condition, and we talked about fuel sources, and we talked about fat calories. People know that some dietary fat does help with hair coat and makes a horse, shiny, which is great. The amount of fat it takes to actually have weight gain or to burn for calories for work are greater than just the couple of ounces it takes to make a horse shiny. But I always have the question if does fat and shiny equal healthy when it comes to horses? And I will just say that fat and shiny definitely beats fat and dull, or thin and shiny, or any of the other choices. But fat and shiny means you're getting enough calories and you're getting enough fat calories to stay fat and shiny. It doesn't mean you're getting enough protein, vitamins, and minerals to stay healthy long term. So I like to tell people I love Lay's potato chips, and I can eat enough Lay's potato chips to stay really fat and shiny, but it doesn't mean I'm healthy. So you can't just look out at a horse eating, good quality forage and say, well, he's getting enough, he's fat and shiny. If he's not getting a protein, vitamin, and mineral supplement of some kind, then long term, he's missing out on some nutrition, and it'll begin to show in things like hoof growth rate, muscle mass, muscle tone. Underneath all that fat, there won't be good muscle tone. His hooves won't grow as fast, and his immune system won't begin to work as well, and that kind of thing. So it's important to provide balanced nutrition. And I do get the question sometimes, if a trace mineral salt block, is that enough mineral for a horse? And I will tell you, if a mineral block is as hard as a salt block, then it's providing salt. And the red salt blocks or the trace mineral salt blocks, they can't provide enough mineral for a horse. Horse can't lick enough of a trace mineral salt block to meet their mineral needs. I calculated out one time, because again, I am a horse nutrition nerd, that a horse would have to eat 2 pounds a day of a trace mineral salt block to meet their copper requirements. So that's not practical and not something we would promote. So if you're not going to feed a ration balancer like Enrich Plus, and you have a horse who stays fat on hay or pasture, at least put out a regular salt block and a true horse mineral from Purina. That would be Free Balance horse mineral. And that's our mineral's 95% mineral and 5% salt, whereas a trace mineral salt block is somewhere between 95 and 98% salt and only about 5% mineral. And it's not a complete balanced mineral anyway. So keep that in mind. Let's see, Greg asked, are all protein sources the same? Actually, no, they're not. So there's quite a variety in the protein sources that you can provide in the diet. A good example of that is something like soybean meal, which is a common, it's a high quality protein source that we use a lot in horse feeds because it has a lot of good quality amino acids, and specifically lysine, which is known to be the first limiting amino acid in horse nutrition. So if you compare something like cottonseed meal with something like soybean meal, say cottonseed meal or peanut meal, sunflower meal, there's a lot of other protein sources that you could use, but they can have the same amount of total protein but not have the same amino acid balance. And you have to think about amino acids. They're the building blocks that make up proteins, and different amino acids make the proteins what they are, and different feed sources have different amino acid balance in them. So if you think about what in the horse's body, what's made out of protein, And you think about muscles and hooves and hair coat, skin. There's also antibodies in the immune system. There's certain hormones that all have a protein base to them. Bone has a protein matrix in the base of it. So when you think about all those different parts of the body that are made out of protein, and you go, well, what's the difference between them? And it's the amino acid balance. So the amino acid makeup of a specific protein makes a muscle cell instead of a hoof cell, for example. And so the same holds true for feed ingredients, that the amino acid balance of the feed ingredients make up the protein, and the horse needs certain essential amino acids, and if they don't have them, the excess protein will simply get excreted in the urine. Some of you who may have fed alfalfa hay to horses before, you may understand that idea of wasted protein and what happens to the extra protein that isn't balanced and isn't utilized as amino acids and doesn't get properly digested and utilized, and horses excrete it in the urine as ammonia. And so that's what happens to a lot of the high protein in any forage, but alfalfa is one that we think about a lot of times. But even really top quality, some really top quality grass hays can have increase the urine output in a horse because they're trying to flush out the excess protein because they're not getting to utilize that as amino acids. So let's see. Got another question. Mythbuster, is soy going to provide estrogen? So there's an idea that there's estrogen in soy and that might be bad for my horse. And that has kind of stemmed from if you think back a few years ago, there was a lot of promotion in the press and in the media about using soy in humans, eating a lot of soy or using soy-based supplements for kind of natural hormone replacement and to prevent, menopause symptoms like hot flashes and things like that. And so for a while, for people, that was considered good. Then the concern is that too much estrogen? So try to put that in perspective. The amount of soy that people ate in soy supplements and the ones you try to do to kind of work as those offsetting those menopause symptoms or doing anything to influence the physiology of the body from a hormone standpoint with significantly higher levels of soy than what we would include in a horse's diet to meet their amino acid requirements. So if you think about it, in 1 pound of Enrich Plus, there's soy protein and there's enough lysine to meet their requirements, but it's much lower level of soy than if you were a woman taking soy supplements to ward off menopause. The other thing is estrogen in plants. It's called phytoestrogens, and lots of plants have them. You'd be surprised how many plants have phytoestrogens. And sheep are known to be much more sensitive to phytoestrogens than any other livestock species. So you can have horses and cattle and sheep all grazing on the same pasture, and if there is a plant in that pasture that is high on phytoestrogens, the sheep will show symptoms and issues with reproduction way before cattle or horses would. In fact, there's never been a documented case that I've ever seen in the literature anywhere where phytoestrogens caused reproductive issues in horses or cattle, just in sheep. And when it's been reported in sheep, it's been from grazing pastures that were high in clover or some plant like that was at certain times of year really high in phytoestrogens, but they couldn't duplicate that by feeding soybean meal or soy protein to sheep. So again, it's all about relativity. It's kind of, I tell people it's kind of like if I'm thirsty and I want to drink a water. If you give me a glass of water, that's great. If you drop me off into a tsunami, that's a little too much water. So I think this is kind of that case where people get worried about the phytoestrogens, but there's not any research or any reports that I know of that would back up or justify the concern about that. We've been feeding soy protein to horses for many, many, many years, and I don't know of any case where the phytoestrogen level affected the horse negatively. So we don't have a lot of folks attending live, so this isn't nearly as much fun as I had hoped in that just getting questions. Greg, appreciate you playing and participating for sure. Let me see. Let me cover a couple of other things just because I want to. I get a lot of questions from up in your part of the country about selenium, and knowing that there's selenium deficiencies in the area and whether people need to feed really specific selenium supplementation. And I will tell you that, like in our feeds and even in Enrich Plus, the ration balancer, they're formulated to be if you feed the minimum recommended feeding level. So if you feed at least 1 pound of Enrich Plus, or you feed at least 3 pounds of Strategy, or 6 pounds of Equine Senior, whatever that minimum recommended feeding rate is, that we put on our packaging, if you feed that amount, the selenium requirements for that horse will be met even if there was 0 selenium in the forage. And the other thing to consider is that the forage that they eat, I know in some cases I've talked to farms up in that part of the country that import hay from other parts of the country. Even though there's a lot of good quality hay in that area, sometimes farms want a specific hay from a specific location, and the location the hay is coming in from is not selenium deficient. So just living in a selenium deficient area doesn't put you in a selenium deficient mode if you're a horse. It has to do with whether you've got any in the forage or in the feed. And again, unless your horse is on an all forage diet, on a selenium deficient pasture and not getting any additional feed, or at least not getting the recommended amounts of additional nutrition, then you would need to look at providing a mineral or a supplement that did have additional selenium. But they're going to be short other nutrients as well, so it's not just selenium. Let's see, what other kind of questions might we want to address this time? What's another myth? One of the things that I run into sometimes is people think that beet pulp is high in calories. And you see people use beet pulp a lot for horses who are hard keepers. And I will tell you, beet pulp is a good calorie source if you're replacing hay with it, or it's a way to get some high fiber calories. It's very digestible fiber. But straight beet pulp it has more calories than most any hay or hay would have, but it doesn't have as many calories as feed would have. So if you've got a hard keeper, if you replace part of your hay with beet pulp and then you feed a high calorie feed to help with the weight gain, that's a good plan. But if you feed beet pulp instead of a feed which should have more calories than beet pulp, you won't get the weight gain that you need. So let's see, we've been going here for a little while. I'm going to leave here with a couple of things. I want to make sure that you guys know, if you're watching this or you missed this live and you're watching it back, you can always go to our website at purinamills.com, and then you can also go to call our customer service, our 1-800 number, and you can ask to talk to a horse nutritionist, and our customer service team is very well trained, and they can help you with choosing, make sure the product you decide to use is the right product for your horse. Or if you have a specific technical question, they can refer you to a PhD that you're welcome to talk to. So just wanted to make sure that I did show our 800 number before we wrapped up. And let's see. Make sure I didn't miss anybody come in with a question. But so that, I think we'll just wrap up now. We've been going for about 30 minutes, and I will tell you, if you watch this back and any of this was interesting to you, or if you have some questions, or if you'd like to talk to Grange Co-op about having another one of these, just share with them some topics you'd like to cover on equine nutrition, and we'd be happy to help. Again, Grange is very committed to providing education to their customers, and so we want to be here to help. And with that, we'll end the broadcast, and thank you very much.